What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Schreckbein, joined always by my main man, Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, we are a week away from OTAs, and man, it feels good to know football is very close to being back. But in the meantime, everybody wants to talk about, well, the same things all the time. Who are they going to trade for? Are they going to trade for a guy like Courtland Sutton, Treylon Burks? Is Naji Harris a name that is on his way out of the Pittsburgh Steelers? And then who should we be watching at OTAs and minicamp? We're going to dive into all of it and definitely more, answer all of your questions as we do every Tuesday and Thursday. It's been a beautiful, but it's a rainy couple of days in the Berg. I noticed this morning that our boy Nick Belsky looks like Paul Skeens, and I'm going to introduce you as such. How we feeling there, Paul?
Feeling good. Arm's a little sore. Would like a little offensive help from my lineup here, but you know, other than being 5'7" in reality and not however tall Paul Skeens actually is, feeling good.
Good. I'm glad to hear. Yeah, 5'7" is I find it hilarious every time you look at a roster and every time you look at an NFL roster and you see guys that are listed at like 5'10", 5'11", and you look at them and you go, nah, I'm 5'7", pal. And I'm looking you right in the forehead. So there's just no chance that you are 5'10". Calvin Austin's that way. I've joked with him many of times. Jaylen Warren's the same way. No chance. And I'll give you another one. John Rice Plumlee. I'd put about a 0% chance that guy is actually 6 foot. Realistically, maybe 5'8" on a good day, depending on the heels that he's wearing. But yeah, not happening. What we're diving into today, Courtland Sutton trade. Everybody wants to talk about it now. Broncos reporter is saying that it seems more likely than not. Nah, I don't think it's going to happen. And I'm going to explain why. On top of that, what's more likely to happen? Naji Harris gets traded. Naji Harris gets extended. I think I have a third answer, and I'm excited to give it to you guys. And then Russell Wilson was named the player to watch at Steelers OTAs and minicamp. And to be quite frank, I don't think that's true. I think there's somebody else out there that I am glued to that I think has a lot more riding on him and that the Steelers will be much more focused on, just because, I mean, it determines more. It determines much more of where the Pittsburgh Steelers are headed, not only now, but in the future. Very excited to talk about all three of them. Courtland Sutton, let's start there. Broncos beat reporters are going back and forth at this point, saying he's not going to get traded. Oh, he is going to get traded. Oh, the Pittsburgh Steelers are calling. Oh, they're not calling. At this point, he hasn't shown up to OTAs or voluntary workouts. Doesn't plan to, it doesn't seem. The Broncos are not negotiating a trade with him or not negotiating a contract with him. He's been very open on social media about how he is not going to attend anything until he gets a new deal. And that obviously starts or sparks the conversation and the speculation of, is he being traded and should the Pittsburgh Steelers give him a phone call? I'm going to say this. I don't think there's any chance the Pittsburgh Steelers trade for Courtland Sutton at this point in time. And to be quite frank, it's because it's very easy to see why they would not. Because Courtland Sutton is worth $18 million, but he wants to be worth more. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, well, they're not looking to pay more for a Courtland Sutton. So before I dive into all of it, let me ask you this. Courtland Sutton for $25 million or Brandon Ayuk for $25 million? Who are you paying for?
Well, when you put it like that, there's one obvious answer in Brandon Ayuk. So I'm not going to even try to give the other name any light in that discussion, because of the two, it's 100% Brandon Ayuk.
It's Brandon Ayuk. And where we find ourselves is a month ago, we were talking about how the Pittsburgh Steelers will trade for Courtland Sutton, or could trade for Courtland Sutton, because he will be a much cheaper commodity. He will cost less in exchange. You could probably get him for a third or a fourth round pick, and then you will pay him significantly less money than you will pay a guy like Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. Where we sit today is you will give up less. You will exchange less for Courtland Sutton. You will give him a third or fourth round pick to the Denver Broncos in exchange for their wide receiver. And you will pay over $20 million per season, because Courtland Sutton has made it known that he is not showing up unless he gets a contract extension. And I have a hard time believing that he's going to show up with an offer that is less than the $18 million that he is currently making. So let me revise the question. Courtland Sutton for $20 million or Brandon Ayuk for, let's say, $28 million?
I'm still sticking with Brandon Ayuk at that point. The ceiling is just too high compared to Courtland Sutton. And I do think that in a vacuum, when you're looking simply at the player, Courtland Sutton is a great addition to the team. But when you look at everything outside of the vacuum, including $20 million, including not coming to camp or optional team practices unless he gets that, I think at that point you start looking at Brandon Ayuk and say, all right, the extra $8 million is worth the added ceiling and the added, impact for what he brings off the field as well.
Yes, look at 100%. 100. That's exactly where the Steelers lie. Is you've hit the point where Brandon Ayuk gives you everything you're looking for in a wide receiver, an immediate wide receiver one, a superstar of the future, a guy that potentially could be one of the best wide receivers in football if he develops or continues to develop and you give him the tools around you. That's what the Steelers were looking for. When we started this hunt, when everybody started digging into the witchcraft of, oh, this is it, man, we are going to find it. Brandon Ayuk was it. It was the easiest selection you could possibly make. Yeah, give up everything. You want to know why? Because you're getting a superstar. The Pittsburgh Steelers never once probably had the thought of, yeah, well, we're just going to settle for a guy that we're going to pay just as much for. Maybe a little bit less, maybe $8 million less a year, but we're going to still pay a boatload of money for a guy that essentially is a little bit better than Deontay Johnson probably and costs way more than Deontay Johnson. It just doesn't make any sense. You're getting the leadership. I get it. You're getting the veteran commodity that you're looking for in a Courtland Sutton. I understand both of those things, but just when you're looking at the player and the price tag of where the Pittsburgh Steelers stand and where the Denver Broncos stand with Courtland Sutton, there's just nobody who could sit around and say Courtland Sutton's worth $20 million a year and the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that never makes moves that do not benefit them more than the other team, is going to make a move for Courtland Sutton that is just way too expensive. Even if it's for a third-round pick, even if it's for a fourth-round pick, it's just not going to happen. If there's going to be a jump, it's going to be a significant jump. It's going to be the Treylon Burks. It's going to be the John Mechie. It's going to be the Noah Brown. It's going to be those guys, which, I mean, Houston continues to just add every wide receiver they could possibly find. So at some point, they got to give up somebody. I don't know who that somebody's going to be, but at some point, I would imagine the Pittsburgh Steelers at least make a phone call. But I don't see it being anybody in between. I don't see it being that Courtland Sutton. I don't see it being those middle of the gap, still going to be expensive guys, because the Steelers are either shooting for the stars, which I think is behind us. I think Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel are on the back burner at this point, and they're just going to drop to, okay, let's get a wide receiver 3 and feel really good about it. And I think Treylon Burks makes a lot of sense. I think John Mechie makes a lot of sense. I think Noah Brown makes a lot of sense. I think Robert Woods makes a lot of sense. I don't think Courtland Sutton makes any sense whatsoever. And I think at this point, every time somebody talks about Courtland Sutton or brings up Courtland Sutton, I just sit here and think we're shooting, we're spitballing against a wall, hoping something sticks, but this one's not going to stick. It's just, I'm past the Courtland Sutton. Am I crazy for saying that? Or are we feeling, maybe Courtland Sutton is a lost cause here, not a real thing for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I'm not going to lie. When you laid it out in the pre-show text chain that we have, I said, really, he's against Courtland Sutton. But when you lay it out the way that you just did, it makes a lot of sense. At first, I think of Courtland Sutton and what he is over Van Jefferson, what he does for the Steelers this year. But the added incentive of that much money coming in, even if it's only when you're trading and the acquisition cost is as low as a third or fourth round pick, the money that you're going to pay a Courtland Sutton is the money that you're going to want to pay a George Pickens in a couple of years. And you don't want to bring in somebody who is not as good as him, but getting paid more than him. And I can see why that would be not beneficial for the Steelers. So, when you lay it out like that, I do have to agree with you that it just doesn't make any sense right now.
Just right. If things change, cool. If the Steelers find themselves where, screw it, whatever. But it's just, you're going to extend Courtland Sutton for 2 years. You're going to have him for 3 years under an expensive price tag. And I'm sorry, it's just not where you stand if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. You could get cheaper options. Treylon Burks, I read something today where Treylon Burks could go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was by ESPN's Bill Barnwell, saying a 6th round pick, and Tennessee takes on $6 of his $8 million guaranteed left on his rookie deal. You're telling me that's, I mean, I don't know how realistic that is, but I think that if that's somewhat of an option, any slice of an option, you're going that over Courtland Sutton any day, even if Treylon Burks has like 650 career yards in 2 seasons. I don't care. You know, he's 24 years old and he costs nothing. That's what the Steelers are looking for. They're going to bank on the rest of it. If it was a Brandon Ayuk, awesome. Anything else, they're just hoping to find somebody who could fill a role, you know, and you could find that in a lot of places. You don't got to shoot for the stars in a guy like Courtland Sutton. Just doesn't have to happen. All right, I got 2 questions I want to answer real quick. Michael, appreciate you as always. Most impactful third-round rookie for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Peyton Wilson or Roman Wilson? I'd say Peyton, great speed, can cover tight ends and the slot. Shazier vibes. The Steelers are looking to make Peyton Wilson their next Ryan Shazier. I will say that. He looked good at rookie minicamp. I'm going to go bigger impact in year 1 will be Roman Wilson, just because, I mean, we just talked about how Courtland Sutton isn't coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Roman Wilson's your number 2 right now. He's going to be banked on very heavily by this team. They're going to utilize him everywhere. Unless a Brandon Ayuk shows up in town somewhere in the next couple of months, Roman Wilson's your guy. It's hard to say otherwise because he's going to be your wide receiver 2, and he's going to be in games where George Pickens, if you're a defense and you're covering the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, you are double teaming George Pickens and hoping for the best with Roman Wilson. And Roman is going to get plenty of coverage and he's going to get plenty of looks from Russell Wilson. So I'm going to say Roman Wilson.
Yeah, I would agree with Roman Wilson. I do think that the big thing with the defense, though, is what happens with Cole Holcomb. If he's not good to go and the Steelers end up finding themselves in shootouts, which I don't know if they necessarily will, but if they do, you're going to see a lot more playing time for Peyton Wilson. And it seems like they're very high on what his potential could be in year 1. But the only issue is, like you mentioned, look at the wide receiver room right now. They're looking at Roman Wilson as a significant part of their offense from day 1. And he's a wide receiver. So the way we measure impact is going to be a lot more on yards and touchdowns than it's going to be on tackles at the line of scrimmage from Peyton Wilson. And hopefully you get those interceptions. But at the end of the day, he's a rookie. He has a lot to learn about the NFL. It's a little bit harder to pick up the linebacker aspect of the game than it is to pick up the wide receiver aspect. And I also think Arthur Smith is going to be able to find ways to get Roman Wilson into those open spaces and utilize his speed to get him the ball with a lot of space so he can make some yards after catch runs.
Yes. I agree. And I think the upside in Peyton Wilson might be a little bit higher than Roman Wilson. I think that, you know, Peyton Wilson could become an absolute star in the NFL. He's got all the makings to do so. I fall into the third, like, it surprised me that Roman Wilson was a 3rd-round pick. It really, really surprised me that Peyton Wilson was a 3rd-round pick. I think if there weren't medical concerns, he'd be potentially end of the 1st round. That's how good Peyton Wilson was. I think the upside is crazy, and it's definitely there. I think Roman Wilson is a guy that is going to make an immediate impact. Peyton Wilson will make an immediate impact. I just don't think it'll be as big or as needed as Roman's right off the bat. Courtland Sutton is a lost cause. Steelers are getting Treylon Burks. I've talked to some people down in Tennessee. I'll tell you this. What I've heard down in Tennessee is that the Titans actually do like Treylon Burks. Now, that's not coming from their general manager. That's not coming from their head coach. So there's a lot of things that could change and that Tennessee could really be thinking about getting rid of this guy. And I think that there's a shot that they are really thinking about getting rid of that guy. But just from what I've heard is that they think Treylon Burks year 3 could make an actual leap. That being said, you sign Tyler Boyd, you go out and get Calvin Ridley, you still got DeAndre Hopkins. Are you really going to bank on a wide receiver that by the time he's ready to go, by the time that you think he could be a star in the NFL, he's on the last year of his rookie deal and you either got to re-sign him, which is very unlikely, or get rid of him then? I think you get rid of him now and you save yourself lost cause. The Steelers were not interested in Treylon Burks in the NFL draft. I'll point that out. They had no interest in Treylon Burks. I think that could change if the price tag is low enough and they just need somebody. But it's very important to know that the Pittsburgh Steelers had very little interest in the Arkansas wide receiver coming out of college. Very little. All right, next thing I want to talk about here, Naji Harris. That's the second hottest topic of conversation amongst the Pittsburgh Steelers fans or media. I don't even want to say fan base because I think everybody else is very knowledgeable to say, nah, I don't think they're going to trade Naji Harris. But everybody in the media wants to talk about trading Naji Harris and shipping him to the San Francisco 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys. I saw the Denver Broncos yesterday. Then the other half is saying, well, the Steelers are probably going to extend him. Jerry Dulac tossed it out there that there's a pretty high probability that the Pittsburgh Steelers extend Naji Harris before the season and give him his $6.9 million just in a signing bonus and keep him around for 2 years. So let me ask you this. What's more likely, the Pittsburgh Steelers trade or extend Naji Harris?
I mean, if I could give the answer of neither, I would. But if it's between the two of those, I think it's more likely that they extend them simply because I don't think that you're trading him this year. And then obviously you can't trade him after this year because his contract's expired. So of the two, I would say it's more likely that you extend him just because I really don't see the Steelers trading Naji Harris this season at any point.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the third option here because I agree with you. I think if it was trade or extend, it is extend. There's no way that you're getting rid of Naji Harris. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm going third option. They're just letting him walk. They're going to get what they could out of him this season. They're going to do what every team has done with running backs over the last 4 or 5 years and just drive them until they can't drive them anymore. And then they're going to let him go. And they're going to let him go sign somewhere else. And they're going to let another team take a major shot on a guy who probably has some potential still, but the Steelers don't need. It's what the New York Giants did. It's what the Las Vegas Raiders did, minus the franchise tag. And the Steelers are not going to franchise tag Naji Harris. They're going to get what they could out of him this year. They're not going to run him into the ground. They're going to treat their running back game exactly like they treated it last year. They're going to try to keep Naji Harris healthy throughout the entire season. They're going to try to win a Super Bowl with Naji Harris and Jaylen Warren running the show. And then next year, they're just going to say, okay, that was great. We appreciate the 4 years that you put into work here. Go sign somewhere else because they're going to pay you more than what we're going to pay you here. And that's where I think the Steelers stand. I think there's almost a 0% chance the Steelers trade Naji Harris this year. Like almost, there's just no chance. There's no, who is sitting around going, you know what? We're going to trade him. Screw a Super Bowl. We're going to trade him. Even if you're not high on Naji Harris, he's a great backup option. As good of a backup option as you could ask for in the NFL. You're not getting rid of him. And it's the same argument that we made for Deontay Johnson last year when everybody was talking about, oh, trade Deontay Johnson, trade Deontay Johnson, trade Deontay Johnson. Why would you trade Deontay Johnson if you're looking to win? You know, you're not going to just trade a guy without being able to replace him. Granted, the Steelers did it this year, but I think that was more to go get Dante Jackson than it was to actually get rid of Deontay Johnson. I also think that they might have kind of felt like there was going to be a little bit of an issue there if Deontay Johnson was hanging out. Naji Harris is a totally different guy. You know, Jaylen Warren is totally fine being a backup. He's got no issues with it. He loves his role in Pittsburgh. Naji Harris is totally fine with splitting carries with Jaylen Warren. They understand what the offense is. They understand what they need to do. If you're hunting for a Super Bowl, the last thing you want to do right now is get rid of probably your best offensive weapon in Naji Harris. So I'm going to say that they don't extend him because they understand where it goes from here. And Jaylen Warren, you could tender him for a lot less money. So that's a much better option. And you could go find a running back. I'm not saying they grow on trees like everybody says they do, but I'm saying that you could go out and you could find somebody. You know, we looked at the market earlier and there's still Damian Harris. There's still Kareem Hunt. There's still Cam Akers. You could go find a number 2 and then you just let Naji walk and you hope that he goes. Your thoughts on that.
The interesting part of this conversation, especially when people are talking about extending Naji Harris for that same money, but multiple years, why would Naji do that? Right? I mean, you could have a really good season. Even if he has a similar season to the 3 he's had before, he's going to make more money on the open market. So why would he be like, all right, well, you didn't pick up my 5th-year option, but let me sign for the amount of money that I would have gotten in my 5th-year option? It doesn't make sense from Harris's standpoint. So while, it'd be great for the Steelers if instead of 1 year at 6.7, they get 2 years, 6.7 million each, it doesn't make sense for Naji. So that whole aspect of extending him just doesn't make sense to me personally. And also, why would he sign for less than that if he knows that if he has another good season, he's going to make 10 and upwards?
Yep, exactly. There might be, there is zero truth to Naji Harris saying, I don't want you to pick up my 5th-year option. Mm-hmm. There's zero truth there. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't like, all right, this is a good opportunity that they didn't. It doesn't mean that him and his agent haven't had conversations about, okay, we think that if we ball out this year, we're going to cash in next year. And we're going to get to a team that isn't in Pittsburgh, that isn't freezing cold, that's closer to family. I'm going to have options. I'm going to get to free agency is an exciting thing for for top free agents. You know, if you're a big name who's coming off a big season, you don't want to re-sign early. You want to hit the open market. You want to go get paid and see how much you're worth. Naji Harris is going to be sitting in the same boat. I think he is sitting in the same boat where he's like, okay, look, you didn't want to extend me, or you didn't want to pick up my 5th-year option. I get it. And I'm okay with that, because all I got to do is put up another 1,000 yards and somebody's going to toss me a bag and I'm going to go get the bag. I think that's the way to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And the other thing, too, is when you look at the crop of free agents next year at the running back position, he's probably, if he's available, the top guy. I mean, other guys there, Aaron Jones, James Conner, Samaje Perine, A.J. Dillon, Nick Chubb. There's a lot of good names, but Naji Harris is in or around that conversation for every single one of those as a better option, or at least a similar option. Maybe not Chubb, but outside of that, it's going to be Naji Harris, and he's in a position where he's not going to have to carry the ball every single game 35 plus times. Yep. He's in a situation where the ball is going to be spread around. So the odds of him getting injured are going to be lower. The odds of him having a good season are still going to be high because it's a similar situation. It's a good situation for Naji Harris to be playing on a contract year. At least it's as good as it could be for anybody in the NFL.
Yep. And on top of that, you don't know what Arthur Smith, and I get it. Like, Arthur Smith is a zone run coach, and Naji Harris isn't a zone run player, but I think that could still mesh well. And that's all he needs. You know, the Steelers, all they have to do is look like the Tennessee Titans a couple of years ago, and Naji be like the guy. And then he's the hottest name out there. You know, he's the guy everybody wants. And the Steelers, okay, yeah, go get your bag. We're fine. We'll make it work. I agree. I don't think that it's going to happen that the Pittsburgh Steelers extend, and they definitely are not going to trade him. But we're still going to have to talk about him trading them, because there's going to be a lot of people who toss every single name out there looking for a running back. And just to kind of shut that down, if you think the Pittsburgh Steelers would trade their starting running back and the leader of this offense for a 4th-round pick, you wouldn't even make that trade mad, man. You wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't even think about it. Never. It would never happen. All right. Last thing I want to talk about before we answer is everybody's questions, so make sure that you keep tossing them in the chat there. Mark Caboli of The Athletic, and I love busting Mark Caboli, so I'm very excited to talk about this. Named Russell Wilson as the player to watch for the Pittsburgh Steelers during OTAs and minicamp. I get it. Russell Wilson is the guy. He's the leader of this offense. I had to rock the shirt today because we're talking about Russell Wilson. He probably is the biggest, most important piece to the Pittsburgh Steelers this season, and you want to see how good he does. My thing is twofold. I have another name for you, but first, the reason I'm not excited or naming Russell Wilson as the guy to watch at Steelers OTAs and minicamp is because it should not be difficult to look good in OTAs and minicamp as a quarterback. Everybody looks good. Kenny Pickett looked good. Mason Rudolph was the only quarterback to ever not look good, but that's just because he was checked down Mason, and he never threw more than 10 yards, and that's just who Mason Rudolph was. All respect to him. The only 2 quarterbacks that I've ever seen not look good at OTAs and minicamp, Mason Rudolph, Chris Oladokun. And I'm sorry, but if Russell Wilson looks as bad as Chris Oladokun, yeah, he's the player to watch, but he's also the player to get rid of as fast as humanly possible, because it's just not going to work out. I have zero expectations for Russ coming in here and not being phenomenal with helmets and shorts on. It's just, it's not going to happen. Like, you know, you're not going to put a quarterback out there and say, you've been here for months, you've been working with these guys already. You're going to go out there and you are not going to. First off, George Pickens can catch anything within a 15-mile radius. If you just throw the ball up, he's going to come down with it. So that's not very difficult. You got Calvin Austin. Most of these throws and offensive plays are very vanilla. They're not throwing everything out there. They're keeping everything as basic as humanly possible. It's just not hard to look good as a quarterback. You want to know who I am looking at? You want to know who my eyes are going to be glued to? Justin Fields. Because what's Justin Fields doing? Is there Justin Fields packages? Is Justin Fields out here throwing 60-yard passes, or is he running the football all the time? Is Arthur Smith utilizing him in creative ways, or is Justin Fields just coming in here and being a backup quarterback? That's who I'm going to be watching. What are they doing with Justin Fields? Because you could still be vanilla and have quarterback runs. You could have options. You could put those are as vanilla as they come. They're not super crazy. They're not very complicated. What's Justin Fields looking like? Is Arthur Smith a big fan of Justin Fields? Is he the guy that, you know, he can't get enough of them. He's out there more often than he's not. You know, what's the initial spark of Justin Fields? That's where I'm sitting, because yeah, it's going to look easy for Justin Fields to look good. I just want to know what the Steelers are looking at with Justin Fields. And I think this is the first time that we could end the speculation and start talking about real football and what we see. And maybe Justin Fields gets a little bit more attention than we expected.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback portion of it, I'm still excited to see. Obviously, it's been a long time since we've heard all these names, Wilson, Fields, to see them with their full complement of receivers. You know, how does the Wilson connection look? How does George Pickens look? Where does, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields put the ball? But I agree with you. Obviously, you're playing 7-on-7, and these are the greatest quarterbacks in the world, at least 2 of the 64 best quarterbacks in the entire world. They're obviously going to look very good. But how much do they value Justin Fields outside of being a backup quarterback? That is a huge question mark right now. That is probably one of the biggest question marks surrounding this team. And it's kind of hard to believe because it's about their backup quarterback. But when you have that much talent, I mean, we already had the Jalen Warren talking about Danny Smith saying, yeah, maybe we'll throw him back there on kick return. So with all of these question marks, can we get some of them answered here in a week? And that would be obviously something to talk about and something to be very interesting as a thread to pull as we go through the stages here leading up to Latrobe and then eventually the season.
Yes, exactly. Just like where's the starting point for Justin Fields? That's where I want to know. Where's the starting point? And on top of that, you got a bunch of Bears coaches talking smack, saying that Justin Fields stinks and he takes forever to read an offense, and he's really late on throws. Okay, like, is that going to show itself, or is he going to be really bad? Is he going to have a terrible release? Is he always going to be behind on his wide receivers? Like, I don't expect that from Russell Wilson. He's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. He's a guy that he's a 9-time Pro Bowler. He's done this. This Justin Fields has not done this, and I would like to see where the starting point of Justin Fields is. That's where my eyes are glued to, and then obviously George Pickens as a wide receiver 1 and everybody else. But when it comes to the offense, what is the connection between Justin Fields and that coaching staff, and how high are they actually on him? Where is pole position for Russell Wilson? Is it all the snaps but 5, or is it half the snaps? Where are we sitting with that? That's where I am going to be watching. That's where my eyes are going to be glued to, at least during OTAs and minicamp. All right, let's dive into some questions here before we head out. For everybody listening, keep tossing your questions in. We'll answer as many as we possibly can before we jump out of here.
Let's start with James's. He asks, are there any worries about Mason McCormick coming from a smaller school? What's his ceiling, and how long does it take for a guy from a smaller school to get up to NFL speed?
So I do have a little bit of worry coming from a smaller school. That being said, I don't think the expectations for Mason McCormick are very high right now. I don't see him as a backup. I see him as a third option. I also think Spencer Anderson could be a guy that could work his way in there a little bit. I view Mason McCormick as a developmental piece for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't think that's started yet. I think that we're going to see where the baseline is and what he could do in a year. Where he is next offseason is where the Pittsburgh Steelers will start to see, okay, this is as good as this guy is going to get, which won't be in year 2. It'll be much higher than that, but they'll get an understanding of where that is, because you are coming from a smaller school. You haven't taken on the same amount of talent that some of these other guys have. And that's obviously something that is a concern, because that's an even bigger jump to the NFL level. But I'm not super concerned about him not making it, because his expectations and where he is on this roster aren't very high right now. How long does it take for a smaller school guy to get up to NFL speed? I don't know. We're going to wait and see. Some guys it takes instantly. Some guys it doesn't take instantly. I think it's a case-by-case basis, and I'm kind of excited to see where Mason McCormick is.
We got 2 of the exact same questions from 2 of our listeners. One is Michael Walker, not the linebacker, but our listener, Michael Walker. And the other one is Pittsburgh Hornets, who asks, how many primetime games do you think the Steelers get, and which games do you think make it to prime time?
So I was a little bummed out that they didn't get week 1 Monday Night Football against the Broncos. Thought that was a lock. Thought that made a lot of sense. I get it, the Aaron Rodgers thing. I guess Aaron Rodgers is bigger than Russell Wilson. I'm joking. Obviously, we know that. I'm going to say Denver Steelers is a primetime game. I think that's a guarantee. I would also say that the Steelers get at least one primetime game against the Ravens or the Bengals. I would imagine it's the Ravens. I would say Lamar versus Russell Wilson is the way to go. I think that Atlanta could be a primetime game. So that could be 3 of them. And then there's going to be the ones that are just kind of like randomly thrown in there. Like I expect the Pittsburgh Steelers to play on one holiday. I would imagine that's Christmas. I think that they're going to play on Christmas if I had to guess. But I would say minimum of 3 primetime games. If I had to guess a number, I'd say 4.
Ark asks, is Beanie Bishop staying or are we letting him try out somewhere else?
So Beanie Bishop is an undrafted guy, didn't have to try out. He's on the roster. He'll be on the roster all summer unless they choose to release him. But he signed for not for the year, but for the summer. And if they like him enough, he'll make the 53-man roster and he'll stick around for the season. So he will not be trying out elsewhere. He's in Pittsburgh. I talked to him at rookie minicamp and he was very excited to be in Pittsburgh. He thinks this is the best opportunity for him. He thinks he could be a starting slot guy in year 1. So I'm excited to see what he brings.
We got another question here about the other side of the football here. Isn't it possible they consider Roman Wilson the number 2 receiver also with so many fast receiver options? Why do they need a big name?
So I think they need a big name. And there's another question in here somewhere about what if George Pickens goes down? And I think that's what it is if George Pickens goes down, who's your number 1? Is it your 3rd round pick and Roman Wilson, followed by Calvin Austin, Quez Watkins, and a bunch of guys who should not be on the field? I think that's what the worry is the Steelers need somebody so that if somebody gets injured, just like last year when Deontay got injured and George Pickens was your number 1, you need that same scenario this year. If George Pickens, something happens and he is unable to play for a game or 2, who is going to be your wide receiver 1? I get it. Roman Wilson's got a bunch of potential, but you don't want to put that on a 3rd round rookie and you don't want to put it on him for an extended period of time just in case that happens. So you need somebody else. That's why I think like a Treylon Burks makes sense because, yeah, you're putting it on Roman Wilson, but at least you have somebody behind him that you feel somewhat confident in. You know, you don't have to shoot for the stars in a Courtland Sutton, but if you have somebody that you feel at least okay with as your wide receiver 2, that's better because if it's Roman Wilson, you don't feel comfortable with anybody being a wide receiver 2. And I'm a big Calvin Austin guy, but I don't think Calvin Austin's earned that yet.
Edgar88 wants to know, do you guys know what's going on with the Brandon Ayuk trade? Has there been any updates over the last couple of weeks?
No, I think the Brandon Ayuk trade is dead for the time being. I haven't heard about Brandon Ayuk. I haven't talked about Brandon Ayuk. I think Brandon Ayuk is behind the Pittsburgh Steelers for the time being. I think that could change come training camp if he holds out and things are getting a little bit dramatic. But I think for right now, everything is quiet. They could care less if he shows up for OTAs and minicamp. They want to see him at training camp. They want to try to get a deal done. If they can't and he's holding out in training camp, then the conversation starts again. But for right now, that ship has sailed.
We talked about 3 options for Naji Harris. Pittsburgh Hornets wants to know if we could combine 2. With Naji Harris, could you do a sign and trade?
I love the sign and trade theories. I think they work out every time if we're able to do them, but they almost never happen. I don't think a sign and trade is possible. I don't think the Steelers would look at a sign and trade because just like every trade, you're going to take on more of that salary as the team getting rid of the player than you are the team receiving the player. So really the Steelers would have to pay Naji Harris and take on more money to get a 4th round pick and they would lose their running back. So I just don't think that that's an option. I think it's an option. I don't think the Steelers are considering it. I think they're very comfortable where they are with Naji Harris right now, and they'll see what happens at the end of the season.
Aaron Ball wants to know, is there any real talk about trading for DK Metcalf after the June 1st deadline?
No, I have not heard anything about DK Metcalf. I have asked for confirmation about the report saying that the Steelers called the Seahawks about DK Metcalf. I was laughed at and said, no, there's no calls for DK Metcalf. I don't think DK Metcalf's a real option for the Steelers. Not saying that he can't be at some point, but where we sit right now, you just got to go off of who they've called for. They've called for Brandon Ayuk. They've called for Deebo Samuel. They've at least thought about Courtland Sutton from what I've heard. I don't know if they've actually made the phone call. They did not call about DK Metcalf, and I have a hard time believing that they're going to.
For the second time today, we have 2 listeners asking the same question. Jacob asks, when do you think Justin will get his chance to start? And then Ryan also asked, what week will Fields start if it comes to it?
I don't think Justin Fields starts this season. I think Russell Wilson is going to be the guy, and I hope that Russell Wilson looks good enough to remain the guy. I think he has everything the Steelers are looking for in a veteran who brings just immediate leadership and the ability to run an offense comfortably. I don't believe all the nonsense of, oh, Russell Wilson isn't smart enough to read a playbook. That's just, come on. I believe the high stepping on airplanes and being a bit of a weirdo with the teammates. I don't believe that he's not good enough and he's not intelligent enough to be a starting quarterback. I think he's proven both of those things. So I look at Justin Fields as a guy who's going to learn this year, who's going to develop nicely, and they're going to see where he is next year. I expect Justin Fields to be here in 2025. And if I had to guess when he starts, it's next season.
Anthony wants to know, who's your sleeper player to watch during mini camp and training camp, etc.
My sleeper player to watch. This is a good one. My sleeper player to watch is I want to say it's Keanu Benton. I think is that a sleeper? Can we say that's sleeper? Does it have to be a backup? I think Keanu Benton's going to be a monster at training camp this year. I think he's going to be a monster this season. I think he's going to be an absolute freak. If I'm going to pick somebody off the bench that I'm thinking takes a pretty significant step forward, I'm going to go with two of them. I'm going to say Calvin Austin is definitely a name to watch. I think Calvin Austin's got a lot of potential in him, and I think in a good offense with a good offensive scheme, he could do a lot. So Calvin Austin's going to be one. Logan Lee, 6th round pick out of Iowa, is the other one. I'm very interested and intrigued in what Logan Lee could bring to the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I don't know how much playing time he gets as a first-year 6th round pick, especially with Dean Lowry and Montravius Adams and Isaiah Loudermilk being ahead of him. But I think this kid could look pretty good, and I think Iowa guys fit in Pittsburgh's defense very, very well. So I would say Logan Lee is the name that I'm keeping an eye on.
Peter wants to know, do you see John Mechie as more of a wide receiver 3 option if the Steelers go after him?
Yes. I think he falls in the same category as Burks, as a guy with a ton of upside but hasn't proven it yet, that they could try to kind of take on and develop. That's how they would look at these guys. Is, okay, they didn't work out on their team and they've already given up on them. Let's try them here. Let's see if they work out here. Wide receiver 3, that's pretty good. You get a better opportunity than what you're going to get in Houston. I see John Mechie as a good option. Like I think John Mechie's got a ton of upside and has gotten very limited opportunities with the Texans. I don't know why you wouldn't make a move for him.
Carl wants to know, what about Darnell Washington? I feel like with Smith as an OC and an expanding receiving role for him is inevitable, and it offsets the need for a number 2 receiver.
Darnell Washington, I think everybody has to put it to bed that he's going to be a receiving tight end. He's never going to be a receiving tight end. He's not a receiving tight end. He's a massive body and he's super exciting, and I get that, but he's not the fastest guy on the field. He's not a smooth route runner whatsoever. He's a Matt Spaeth. He's a really good red zone threat. Toss it up to him in the end zone, and chances are he's going to come down with it. I like that role for him. But he works best and is best utilized as a blocker. Like, this dude is a phenomenal blocking tight end. And I don't think he did his best work last year, but he was a rookie dealing with some knee issues and a bad offensive scheme. Let's put him in a good running offense and see how good of a blocking tight end he could be. I think that should equally excite people. Like, that should put people in a position where it's like, Darnell Washington can move some people around, and this could be some old school beat you up football, and he might fit in that perfectly. That's where I see Darnell Washington, and I think he's going to grow in there, and I think he's going to be really good there.
Eric wants to know, how soon do you think Hayward, Cam, gets a contract extension, and does anyone else get a restructure this offseason?
I think TJ and Minka are still on the board for restructures, but that depends on if the Steelers are going to make another move and if they want more cap space, because right now they don't need to do that. Cam Hayward, I'm still back and forth. Obviously, the reports came out from Alan Saunders that he is in talks with a contract extension. I'm not totally sold he's going to get one done before the start of the season. I could see it being they need to sign somebody, and that's their first option, is to extend Cam one more year. But I also think that that's not going to happen until Cam tests it out in training camp and see how healthy he is, see how motivated he is. Like, at this point in Cam's career, he's got to be hitting the point where it's tougher and tougher every year to go and spend a month in Latrobe. Like, your body hurts, you're sleeping on terrible beds. Like, I don't know. It can't be the easiest thing in the world. All those guys hit that point eventually in their career. I think they're going to see how Cam's body is feeling in Latrobe before they extend those conversations.
Edgar wants to know, how many seasons are you willing to give the Steelers' next quarterback before determining that it's time to move on to someone else?
One. Just one. If Russell Wilson gets this season, that's it. If it doesn't work out, you try out Justin Fields. And if that doesn't work out, then you draft somebody. That's the way to go about it. You can only deny the inevitable so long. And the inevitable is chances are you're not going to win a Super Bowl by just keep adding veteran quarterbacks. It happens sometimes. It doesn't happen all the time. And the long term, it almost never works out longer than a couple of years. So I would give everybody one season. If they don't work out, then you're moving on.
Another question here about the offense asking, do you think Pickens can become a leader for the Steelers offense?
I don't know about a leader. I think a leader is a tough word. George Pickens has some, he's still young. We're going to leave it at that. He's still young. And I think he's got a little bit of growing up in the NFL to do. And that happens. Everybody's young, and not everybody took on a leadership role in college. Georgia was a big school with a lot of leaders, and Kirby Smart takes on most of that leadership role. So I don't know about a leader. Superstar, yes, but I'm not going to say leader just yet.
Teeman has the important question here. Have we finally figured out the punter situation? How is Johnston?
I mean, Mike Tomlin said it himself. He was the cream of the crop in free agency. He was the best option that they could come up with. So I'm hoping. Cameron Johnston's a dude who he's got good experience. He's never really had a bad year in the NFL. I think that's all you're looking for, is a guy who could come in here, be a dude where you don't have to worry. And I think that's who Cameron Johnston is. So I'm going to say yes. At least for the next 2 years, I'm going to say yes.
The Pittsburgh Hornets have a question here saying, what are the odds that Dan Moore Jr. ends up starting in week 1?
I'm going to say 50-50 right now. I'm going to say 50-50 Dan Moore Jr. starts. We got to see what Troy Fautano could do. I'm going to lower. I'm going to say 40-60 that he starts. I think Troy Fautano is going to come in here and look really good, and Broderick Jones is going to move to the left side. But I'm not going to rule it out just yet, just because you got to see what Troy can do. And the Steelers are just the slowest team in the world with letting these guys go. And a lot of times it works out. Sometimes they wait too long. I think they're going to I think Dan's going to take the starting rep, the first rep of OTAs. I don't know if he's going to take the last one of training camp. We'll put it at that.
Edgar has a question that takes us back a little bit, saying, do you honestly think any or all of the Steelers teams of the 2010s were objectively on par or superior to the likes of the Super Bowl contenders of the day, including the Seahawks, 49ers, Patriots, and then a little bit later he threw in Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos?
So the Steelers for a little while there, their problem was that they got rid of Pittsburgh Steelers football, and we all watched it. It was the Ben Roethlisberger show, and nothing against Ben. I mean, dude, you that's a Hall of Fame quarterback. You win Super Bowls with Hall of Fame quarterbacks. But you need a defense, and the Steelers struggled to put a defense on the field year after year after year, a complete defense. There were always holes. There were always holes there and holes here and holes there. That's why the Steelers' defense now looks so good, and their offense needed to be rebuilt because they completely changed it and said, all right, we need a defense. And then Ben was too old to get anything done, and the offense was so bad. Now they have what looks like a complete team. So I think objectively, yeah, they were not on par because their defense struggled and their secondary struggled, and they were missing a superstar. I mean, how many years did you go with Sean Davis replacing who was the dude from Green Bay, Morgan, replacing Mike Mitchell, replacing Ross Cockrell at corner? Like how many years in a row did you go through that? LT Fort trying to play inside linebacker. I'm Dirty Red trying to play inside linebacker. It's just a long time of just filling the gap with guys who didn't work out on defense. That was the issue.
Let's close it out with this one from Carl Spackler. He says, if Russ and Fields fail, hoping that it doesn't happen, how realistic is an Arch Manning bid?
Look, I don't know. You're going to have to wait 2 years. I think the timeline works out there. If Arch is going to come out in, what would that be, 2026? So maybe. I'm not going to say no. Arch Manning in Pittsburgh would be awesome. Would be, and I can tell you right now that guy is all football all the time. I have heard incredible things about this dude's work ethic and how his mind works and just his dedication to the game. And I think a city like Pittsburgh, where there ain't much to do except play football and think about football, I think it could work out very well. So I would not rule out Arch Manning. Would I say it's realistic? I don't know. I think that's too far in advance to guess here, but I would say that would be a very good fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers if that happens.
And that's a wrap.
That's it. That's it for us today. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as we've been saying, please subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips. Again, we love these live streams. We do them every Tuesday and Thursday, and we're very appreciative to continue to do them every Tuesday and Thursday. With that said, we will be back tomorrow. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.